All right. My name is Craig Cook. I'm a patent attorney and partner at Knobbe Martens, and Bear. I'm here with Harnik Shukla, who's also a patent attorney and partner at Knobbe Martens, and Bear. And we're very fortunate to have two investors, Terri Burke at Intuitive Ventures and also Dennis McWilliams of SANTE. So they're going to share their perspectives and also some really good recommendations from the investor side of the table. We're going to mostly talk about a little bit of like what the things that we need to do and how to do them. That's what Harnik and I are mostly going to cover. Start off, we are going to go through a couple of like true and false kind of quiz questions and just kind of test your understanding of things and try to correct some misunderstandings of the IP law potentially. And again, help prepare yourselves for discussions with two people like these guys. So maybe by a show of hands, who thinks that if you have a patent on a product that you've got freedom to operate? You have the ability to make it without potentially facing any litigation or lawsuit against you. Does anybody know the answer to that? That is correct. The answer is no, but oftentimes I think new innovators and customer or companies, startups think that we've got a patent that gives us the ability to make the invention in the US. First thing to know is that a patent gives you the right to make, use, exclude others from making, using, and selling within the United States. Patents are also territorial, so the protection that you get in the United States doesn't extend outside the United States. So you're going to want to look at international protection as well. The next thing is patents have a particular term of 20 years, and oftentimes, 20 years from the date of filing. And you can develop that kind of that monopoly for excluding other people within that period of time. By that. There are other things we talked a little bit about. We're going to focus mostly on patents, but there are trade secrets also. Every company is going to have trade secrets, the know how to do something, the things that you can kind of keep protected internally without having to expose them in a patent application that somebody else can come up with or develop on their own. But we're mostly going to focus on patents today. But there are also, as part of intellectual property, there are trademarks for brand protection, there are copyrights, there's other data privacy type issues that might go into intellectual property. Typically, you'll have a cover page that's going to show you who the inventors are, who owns the patent. It's going to give you a little abstract of it. It's going to tell you when the patent issues. But one of the questions that we talked about with Dennis is, how do you know the difference between an issued patent and a published patent application? And oftentimes it's in the number. So in the United States, you'll get a number that indicates the date of publication, and it'll be a longer number started by like a 2022 slash, and that's usually the year of publication. That'll tell you if it's an issued patent or a pending publication. There's a big difference, obviously. A patent is enforceable, publication is not. So when you're looking at, potential issues like freedom to operate and you're looking at the publication of it, you got to make sure that you understand that that hasn't really gone through examination yet. The claims at the end, which define the scope of the invention, they haven't been tested by the patent office yet. So when you're looking at those particular claims, they might be a little bit broader. It might look like it covers your product, but it's probably going to get narrowed. The other question I often get is, how did somebody get a patent on that? It's a stent. Stents have been around for decades. If you look through the claims, you'll often find one or two limitations that distinguish it from the prior art. So when somebody's looking at a particular patent and you want to understand like what your risks of infringement are, you're going to look at, a lot of times the first blush, you're like, oh, the pictures look just like our product, or, the description here, that's exactly what we're doing. Look at the claims. The claims are always at the end of the patent. Wait till the patent issues. And then you can start understanding exactly what the scope of their protection is just from the language in the claims. So it's pretty important to be able to understand at least the anatomy of the patent to really have a discussion maybe with potential investors of, they're going to ask you what are the barriers to entry? What's your freedom to operate? And you want to at least be able to have some level of sophistication to be able to answer those questions. And certainly if you guys have any tips or points or
Yeah. You were asking kind of the prep call, like, how do we think about intellectual property? When do we start thinking about intellectual property? And of course, it always depends a little bit on the space that we're in, because there are certain spaces where, our immediate response is, well, how are you going to get around the patents that are out there? But I would say generally, like our model at SANTE, and we're really early stage investors, is when somebody's pitching us, our first assumption is we're going to assume that the science works, and we're going to assume that whatever patent situation is good. That's our assumption. And then we go validate, is the business opportunity interesting? Does it fit our fund? All those types of things. The next thing that we do is we then work on validating the science, giving us around the science. And then once we do that, we're like, okay, what's the IP situation? And that really is dependent on the stage that you're at. I know for us, particularly in medtech, it's a little different in our biotech practice. But in medtech, our first question is, what's your freedom to operate? Like, can you even practice what you're doing? Like, because if you can't, then, you're really not gonna be able to do anything till you solve that issue. And we could talk about maybe the ways that we look for value, because getting a formal freedom to operate opinion from a prestigious law firm is very expensive. So maybe we can talk about that a little bit. So, we want to make sure you got freedom to operate. And then, yes, we want to understand, like, of your clinical value proposition, the unique element of your system, what patents do you have to prevent others from doing that? But it's kind of in that order. So it's funny, like, yes, the patents are super important. You need to have a strong, robust patent portfolio. But like in our orders of, like, crises and problems, it really starts with freedom to operate first. And we've got some war stories. I don't know, Terry, how you think about it when you.
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends a little on the stage of investment. So the earlier the company, I think it's exactly as you describe, right? You want to know that the value prop, what the company thinks is really unique, has
Right.
freedom to operate. Um, but there may only be filings at that point in time. You may not have issued patents yet. So then the next question would be a little bit of the strategy and how's the company going about thinking about its product development? Is it's keeping its product development in lockstep with its IP attorneys so that the ultimate commercial embodiment has the right claims associated with it? We're also thinking about as you're moving forward, like where are you in that process? So as you get to a later stage, you should have some things that are maybe starting to issue. So then you can start to figure out, like, do I sort of own a space, or have I blocked? Do I have a picket fence that I'm building around what I'm doing? So it's a progression. I would say in investments we've made in early stage companies, not all of them have had issued patents, but we felt confident in a strategy. Um, and some do have patents. So just having a patent by itself isn't enough. It's sort of like looking at it all together. But similarly, we're going to look at the market. We're going to look at the unmet need. We're going to look at the widget, the device. We're going to think about how that's working. We're going to get through all those questions first before we really worry about IP. And so we're willing to put in that work because we like the market, we like the concept, we like the management team, all those things. And then so it is an important thing to know that you could be working with a potential investor. Things are going really well, you're working together, and then somewhere down the line, something could fall out, where you feel like we've answered all these questions, we've answered how to build the product, we've shown all our test results, they're in our data room, they've looked at all these things, but generally IP is a little later in the process.
And one way to think about it is, freedom to operate is kind of a binary thing. If you don't have it, it's kind of full stop. You can't really commercialize, and that would be a real problem for a potential acquirer coming in. But then, when you flip it around on the patents that you own, that starts to get to how much value an acquirer is going to attribute to what you're doing, particularly if you're pre-revenue. I mean, if you're a revenue company, to some extent, like, you've already kind of proven that you've got some exclusivity and you're driving on that. But if you're a pre-revenue company, the value that they're going to place on the asset that they're buying is really the power of, one, binary yes or no, freedom to operate, which they spend a ton of time on, and then two, making sure then, or how we're going to exclude others. And that second question is going to be how much value they attribute to what they're buying from you.
Okay.
Right, and especially for startup companies, it's as you said, like it might be just few patent filings, but there is a way to quickly build your patent portfolio in the U.S. The patent office has this fast track program, so you could file a new application with a track one request. It's just additional about $2,000, but it gets you a lot better examination, and in most cases, I've been able to get clients an issued patent within a year. In contrast to sometimes it takes 3 to 5 years. So highly recommend, if you're trying to build your portfolio, if you're filing your first patent, do it on fast track. It will actually save you money compared to the repeat back and forth with the examiner. And for a recent startup, we went from like 0 to 4 patents in a matter of just 16 months. So that way you can build a patent ticket and a moat around your technology.
I think it's an important point because as a company, you're thinking about where your value inflection points are, when you're going to be through significant milestones. As a company, you're also thinking about when you need to raise capital. And so, if you can time your patent strategy so that you perhaps have some issued patents when you get to a financing round. Maybe it's a question for you, but we've talked about it in the past that sometimes VCs are kind of risk averse around intellectual property.
And I would say not always sophisticated. I mean, to
No,
be honest, like,
yeah.
I mean, Terry and I share a unique background, or not unique, but we have a similar background that we're both operators in medical device companies. And I think when you've been an operator, you have a different perspective on intellectual property and what's, strong, and I think, again, a lot of venture investors who haven't done that, they just have a binary view of IP a lot of times. We'll talk a little bit about how diligence goes and kind of how that process walks through. But yeah, I mean, to some extent, I think investors want to be able to check the box that the IP's handled, like, that there's some good patents there, there's freedom to operate, and they've got good counsel. Like, it's that check box. And as long as you check those boxes, most investors aren't going to give you a hard time. But it's when one of those is not, or we'll talk about IPRs in a little bit. Like, when one of those is not, that's when the red flags start kind of going off at the VCs, and you can spend a lot of time on it.
And that's why I think that your comment about the track one is really interesting because it does allow you a faster pathway. You can build with good counsel, you can build a strategy where some patents, are going to take longer to work their way through the system, but others, and you can then come to a financing perhaps with one or two of these track one issued patents to say, we do clearly have something here that at least in the eyes of the patent office is patentable. Doesn't change the FTO side of things, but so again, being really planful in the strategy along with your business and your value milestones, I think is important, and probably more companies can do that to be successful.
Yeah, and it's important, I think, I want to add to that, the benefit of getting that early patent is maybe you leverage a little more confidence with the investors, but you can also use that to leverage other patents internationally. A lot of patent offices around the world will look at what the US did. In fact, there are even specific programs that you can enter into where they actually look at the fact that you've got granted patents in the United States and use that to leverage hopefully a better and faster result internationally in countries like or regions like Europe. You can use that type of a thing under the PACE, or called the Patent Prosecution Highway Program. You can use that in various countries also. So getting that early patent, that seed patent started and granted early really helps develop a lot of different, potential, additional resources and additional, accolades that are going to help you in a lot of different ways.
So actually, can I ask a question? I mean, we get this question a lot from our portfolio companies and, companies we look at is like, what should I do on my international filings? How aggressive should I be? I mean, some companies show up and they've got 140 countries, China, India, everything going. Others have US and Europe, and that's it. I mean, like, what kind of guidance do you give? Because those things get really expensive.
They
Like, those
definitely
IP.
do. Yeah.
Yeah.
So as I was mentioning in the prep call, usually, I'm the one telling the clients like, no, 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 we don't need to go to all of these countries. So, of course, you're filing in the US, and then Europe is, essentially an easy answer. But after US and Europe, it really has to be strategic, right? Like, are you manufacturing a particular device in Mexico? Then maybe it makes sense to file in Mexico. Do you see some reimbursement potential in Australia? Or are you going to do some clinical trials in Australia? And then you think about filing some applications over there. I do a lot of work in sensors and algorithms, and almost all of our algorithm cases, we just file in US. We don't even bother going in all these different jurisdictions. Because one of the big things that companies fail to realize is that in US, you don't really have to pay the maintenance fees until the patent issues. But in most other countries, just to keep them pending, you have to keep paying this tax. So even though you have no issued patents, but if you're filed in 10 different countries, you're paying this tax to keep it pending for years on.
Well, that was a really good comment about just the payment, right? That you might have. So one tip I have, and I did it certainly with my startup company, is if you're working with great counsel, ask them to project your fees for a year or 2 years. They know your schedule, they know where you filed, they can tell you when those payments are due. Your CFO will love you because they have some predictability, but you can also start to see where are those costs going to add up, and you can make also not only strategic decisions around like which geography, but you can also be really informed on the financial side to know where those right markets are for you. So I think it's important because it's really hard to keep track of, and the costs keep coming on patents from And so going,
Yeah.
so we talked about that you often provide that level of,
Yeah, because there's also, I mean, there's examination costs, especially, there's translation fees in, certain other countries, like the Asian countries particularly. So it is really important. I totally agree. It's important for our clients, especially the startups, to be able to forecast those costs well in advance so that they've got that, the budget set aside to be able to dedicate to that. Because the last thing you want to see is investing 2/3 of the way and running out of money and then having to abandon some of your international applications because
That's never
it
happened.
happens. It does happen, yeah. Um, yeah, and it's,
No, I mean, it's funny. Like, look, everyone in this room, if you got to type, we're all managing cash, and like, when we're in the companies and we're trying to extend, where we're trying to raise around, and we're pushing the CEO to cut costs and manage. I mean, we go through patent costs, and it's painful because you have invested all this costs up to that,
right.
and if you get this meaty $200,000 a year fee, it's a target you got to talk about, and so you can't give up the crown. But it's funny, like that type of exercise really forces you to kind of think through strategically what's really important. Do that at the beginning
Yeah.
with a good advice, so then that way you're not overpaying on it, and again, that's a common mistake we see.
Yeah, and I will say, to kind of answer your question with a little more particularity, you don't have to go after all the countries that you might even market and sell in. You don't always have to do that. You have to create enough of an impediment that a competitor doesn't want to go into those countries. And you can do that with establishing really good, strong IP in the main markets. So you don't have to think about all the little countries that are going to add up all the costs. $100 or $2,000, that's a pretty big budget. I don't think we see fees like that typically for startups. But you do need to plan ahead and know that.
We're talking about IPRs in a moment.
Well, that's a separate question. That's a separate, completely different thing. But if there are programs in place like the Patent Cooperation Treaty that allow you to defer some of those costs down the road. And most companies take advantage of that. And that allows you start out with the US as your primary market typically. And then you can use this PCT, the Patent Cooperation Treaty program, to kind of defer the costs, another 1.5 to 2.5 years down the road after your first filing. So very, very good ways. And that's the intention, to kind of let you hopefully have a better understanding of the markets that you're going to want to get into, hopefully have a little bit of revenue. I mean, that's probably pretty early for most medical device companies, but at least have some good foundation of investment and, capital to be able to pursue those countries. But I think Harnik said it perfect: strategic. Just be strategic about it.
Right.
Don't shoot for the moon. There's no reason to.
Yeah, and I think we've been touching a lot of different aspects of IB diligence. So I just wanted to get it back and set up the framework. Just before you're prepping for your either CUSA IP diligence, you need to make sure you've got 3 questions answered. It's, do you have ownership of your patents? We haven't really talked much about ownership, but that issue ends up becoming really a big problem early on, especially if you've had consultants. I've noticed, especially after COVID, a lot of startups use consultants, but they don't have the best agreements with them. And startups, whenever they file an application, they think, well, I filed the application, so I must own it. But inventorship is a legal concept. You can't arbitrarily decide who gets to be an inventor. So, often it ends up that whether you're working with a university professor or a doctor at a hospital or a consultant, they end up becoming inventors for your patent application. So you want to make sure you had the right agreements.
And when do they show up? They show up when you've got the term sheet signed with the acquisition,
Yeah.
and the numbers name. They're going to, then they raise their hand, and then that's when they show up.
Yeah, and there's 2 things I'd like to add to that. One is really simple: an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. It seems to me like all these issues, these consulting agreements, they're pretty easy to negotiate at the start of an agreement, but when things maybe start going sideways or a lot of revenue starts coming in, people's memories fade, people have a difference of opinion potentially at that stage. Get your agreements in place that exactly requires the ownership to be transferred to your company at a very early stage. Honestly, before the disclosure of any information, before they're onboarded, that's the time to do it. Make sure they're in writing and make sure they're reviewed by good attorneys to make sure that everything looks clean.
Yeah, on that, I would say think about, there's a lot of great R&D houses that sometimes, if you're a physician and maybe you've got a napkin drawing and you're thinking about, like, how do I get some prototypes made? Those are the contracts you really want to make sure have clauses around IP, who owns it, is it assigned to the company, right? Just make sure, even like the simplest of things, but when we're doing diligence as investors, we're going to start to look at that kind of thing to make sure that there's a clear chain of custody, and that we know that, hey, these 6 different people have contributed, but guess what? The company we're interested in investing in, they own all of that. It's assigned to them. We're going to have counsel check that for us, because it gets messy, and the time to clean it up is when you're still a small company and you have the ability to do that. Like Dennis said, it gets ugly later.
Right.
And transfer agreements with universities, that's an important piece.
And that's kind of like, I mean, I was thinking, my brain was trying to go like, well, what's, when we're doing diligence on a company and we're getting serious about doing a deal, kind of our order of operations on IP, like I would say early on, we want to be educated on what have you done on freedom to operate. And so very seldom do companies at the stage we see have a formal freedom to operate opinion
Right.
from counsel. I mean, that's amazing when they do. So we kind of judge that by probing questions like, do you know what freedom to operate is? If they don't, then that's, negative tick. Have you searched, if they talk about the search that they've done and it was a thoughtful search of how they're doing, it's like, at least they're thinking about that. Or, there's something, we call, and you guys probably have a term or have an offering for it, but a soft FTO. So it's like a non-formal opinion, but you can do different levels of that. And so we kind of just want to understand, and we kind of query on that. We don't confirm any of it, but we just ask. We kind of understand what are the claims that you think are unique to what you're doing. And then I would say, before we go to the term sheet, if, back to, do you own it? If you have a licensing agreement with somebody, we'll read that. We'll want to understand what royalties are, what you owe, and that. Like, that's kind of like our
Joint invention.
joint invention agreement. So we'll do all that work ourselves a lot of times, just to confirm, like, just the basics are there. Then we negotiate a term sheet. And then once we sign a term sheet and we've agreed upon the deal, then we hire independent IP counsel and we spend money. So, we'll spend, 50, 70, $100,000 with an IP firm that we select. We just could not be a lot. And we basically sick them on your intellectual property. They go away for 4 weeks and they come back and give us a report. We pay for it initially, and then you pay us back if we do the deal with our money. So, like, that's kind of how that works. Um, if there are problems that pop up in there, and there oftentimes those problems do kind of pop up, that becomes a conversation of how much risk we're going to take in terms of, because, if we break out the term sheet, we've got to pay our legal costs on that. And so, that's kind of how the order of operations goes on that. And, maybe you can talk about being on the other side of those engagements.
No, that's absolutely right. So, like I said, the 3 prongs. You look at the ownership, and the cleaner it is, it gives you that impression of sophistication, right? It's all about credibility.
And we'll ask you guys, like, all right, they'll walk you through the report, like, okay, do they know what they're doing? It's like, yeah, their counsel's really good. The
And
person's the
they're
company, right? Yeah. It's like they've done a good job here. Or it's like,
Right. And then on FTO, it's a story, right? As Dennis said, it's not like most folks will have a full like $50 to $100,000 FTO report. But do you know who your competitors are, right? What are some of the patents that are in your space? Do you have an idea of how you're getting around it? Or there might be spaces like, remote monitoring or ECG, where patents have been there for 20 plus years, and a lot of it's in public domain. So just generally having a good story for your FTO, that gives you a lot of credibility when we are probing on behalf of VCs.
And Dennis, you raised, I think it's a really good point. I mean, there's a little bit of a scale on this too. The earlier stage you are, and I think this applies to all of these 3 prongs, but, for freedom to operate, it might be a good story in the beginning. But if you're, along the point of being you have a commercialized product on there. I mean, at that point, you expect something a little
we would want to
forward.
I mean,
Yeah.
in most
Yeah.
companies, when they their own, like our quality control system, when I was at Apollo, it required a freedom to operate opinion to launch a product. That was kind of part of our checklist
Right.
process.
Mm.
Not everybody does that, but yeah, I mean, there is kind of a scale of what you expect.
Right.
So great panel so far. Thank you so much. My question relates to software as a medical device. So you're laughing. Exactly. So we feel like it's always kind of like, where's your IP? But at the same time, like patenting algorithms feels, like a busy therapy. But at the same time, investors are like, used to medical devices, like everything is patented. But when you go to software, so just curious from the panel, like, how do you build a software as a medical device patent strategy?
Right.
And to create, to answer those questions of the investors when we hit the IP questions.
So I'll answer maybe as an operator and a marketer at heart, and then you can
Sure.
certainly speak to the strategy. But I think some of it is what we've been talking about, where do you have, as an innovator, do you have a strategy? Do you have a solid understanding of what you think is a trade secret and unique versus what you think you should patent? So I would say have your story together and have good counsel, because when you get into these diligence situations, you're going to have these guys talking to your counsel. So you want to make sure you're well represented where someone can explain why you chose certain approaches. So
Or
I always,
detecting,
or what
really,
you're
really.
protecting and why. So I think it comes to what's your value proposition and how are you executing against that? And then maybe you can speak to
Right.
like how you decide that.
Yeah, and you're right. It's very complicated when it comes to algorithms. Most of the times, I recommend keeping the deep algorithms that cannot be reverse engineered just a trade secret, because the type of claims you're going to be able to get, the protection is going to be generally narrow, and you don't want to give away your crown jewels. Specifically, all those companies who are doing AI work. You don't want to tell them what your model looks like, what your weights are. No, that shouldn't be in a public domain. So that should all be kept trade secret. But on the other side, there's a lot of things that are user facing, all your user interfaces, how your doctor is working with the computer screen, right? Like how they're manipulating the data. Some of those features are extremely valuable because if somebody's going to copy you, they're going to be copying the user interaction features. And that's where most of the protection should be.
Do you have a good sense for, maybe the requirements of trade secret, what it takes to get one, how to protect it, those kinds of things? Does anybody want to know a little bit more about trade secret protection? Yeah. Okay. All right. So I think the kind of the first point is it's a heck of a lot cheaper because there's not really anything that you have to file. It's mostly that you have to take precautions to keep that information secret. One of the downsides to trade secret is that it doesn't prevent others from independently developing that technology and using it, but it does protect against the misappropriation. That tends to be a really important factor for a lot of companies. There's a lot of mobility of employees between companies, consultants, et cetera. I think the level of precautions that you need to use or apply to keep that information secret is typically commensurate with the value of the trade secret. But the important steps are identify it, make sure everybody knows their trade secrets, make sure everybody that comes across that, keep it on a kind of a need to know basis or limited access to the extent that you can. These are some of the things that you can do. And the ones that do have access to it, make sure you have really good, strong agreements, written agreements that they understand the nature of the trade secret, that they agree not to divulge it, not to use it, et cetera, all those kinds of things.
One of the most valuable trade secrets is the recipe for Coca-Cola.
Yep.
Everybody knows that. The story I love to tell in trade secret can be the most powerful if you can really pull it off. Like, it's extremely valuable. But anyone know the Kentucky Fried Chicken story? Like the KFC story? So KFC was another very valuable trade secret. Colonel Sanders' secret recipe of the spices for. Do y'all know what I'm talking about?
The batter.
Okay. All right.
We can look okay.
Like stairs. So it's been a trade secret, very, very valuable to our franchise. Bet on it, and he had, Colonel Sanders had long died, and it was kept in a safe, a very protected safe by the family, and like that was the crown jewels of it. And there was this reporter who was doing a story on Kentucky Fried Chicken and interviewing the heir that it kind of was responsible for this now, and asked him about the trade secret and said, yeah, we keep it in the safe over here. And the reporter says, can I see it? And the guy goes to the safe, pulls it out, and lets him take a picture of it. And so now, I mean, you can Google KFC and then you can see an actual picture of it.
Is that a real story?
It's a real story. And
So don't do that.
instantly he's gone.
Yeah. I mean, just tactically, with trade secrets, we would have this conversation. I worked at Edwards for a lot of years, and operationally, if you have, I don't know, pick it 25 engineers working on something and it's truly trade secret, probably one or two need to have access to it. So you have to think about it in terms of like, how are you going to protect and demonstrate that it is a trade secret? Because if it's really a trade secret, like every employee shouldn't have access to it. You should have a closed system, et cetera. So you do have to operationalize not only what counsel is saying from a trade secret perspective, but also how are you going to make sure it stays safe within your organization?
Right.
Yeah.
What about a question?
This is not about trade secrets, but I had a question around How have you seen companies expand their IP portfolio outside of the U.S. and Europe, and like the main markets that you have money for in the beginning, but maybe, you kind of
Yeah, I think but I mean, I think you said it best, Craig. Like, you don't need a patent in all those areas because really what you're trying to do is prevent somebody from manufacturing your device and going through all the trouble of manufacturing your product. So the higher the pain level of reproducing what you're doing physically, the less you have to worry about. Like if you block the U.S. markets, Europe, it makes no sense to build a massive manufacturing group to compete in like Argentina. Like it just does. Like it'll never pay off. So think about it along those lines. But if things are more fungible, like, we just talked about software, like where it is super easy to do it. Like there's a little, the easier it is for somebody to copy, the lower that barrier is, then you have to worry about that a little bit more in those countries. But I don't know. I mean, we look forward. Do you have it in the US? And then like, if you have it in Europe, okay, that's great. And then maybe if the disease state is super prevalent in some country, maybe we're curious about being Japan and Korea or something like that. And then, Japan and China, like, I don't know what advice you guys give now, but like, we do not opine on that. Like, we do not expect anybody to have IP in those countries.
Right. China used to be big for a few years, and now it's
Does it matter? No, it's not. It doesn't seem like it now. Well, and there are other barriers, like what we found at Apollo when I was doing that. Like, we did file some IP in China because we felt it was a big market for what we were doing. But it took so long for us to get the regulatory approvals for the products in the country that the IP was almost moot. So
And well, thank you for answering all these questions. So we developed a novel medical device, and we were wondering how do we protect the design of the device?
the design.
the design.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you want to take that
Do
question?
you mean design by like the ornamental appearance of it?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. In fact, actually, it's a really powerful way to protect a product. I know we were talking about that in our last call last week. Design patent applications, and they're recognized around the world. But again, it's country specific. You have to get one here, you have to get another one in Europe, et cetera. But there are specific design patents that you can file an application for, and it has to cover just strictly ornamental, non-functional features. And it is a powerful way. I mean, we've seen a lot of really strong, you know, cases and litigation results based on design patents. And we get them like I do a lot of design work as well myself and a lot of enforcement on behalf of clients where there are clear competitors coming on the market that are just carbon copying in China and Alibaba, et cetera. And design patents have been extremely powerful to shut those down very quickly because you can get design patents quickly. You can get them for a lot lower cost compared to utility patents, which cover the functional features of it. And you can also get them internationally as well. And there are also international agreements, just like I was talking about that patent cooperation treaty. There are the Paris Convention Treaty allows you to basically claim priority to an application in the United States to extend your protection abroad as long as you do within a certain time period. So just like even utility patents, I think the best strategy, start in your strongest market, which is typically the United States, get that application on file. And then if you know there are other areas that you want to be able to extend that protection into, you've got a certain amount of time down the road to do that. But design patents are a very powerful tool that I think any customer that really values the appearance and overall aesthetics of their product should strongly consider. It's a great question.
And it's really easy to file a lawsuit on design patents. So you need to stop it. If you need to stop somebody stop an infringer, then it's a lot cheaper. You get into patent lawsuits. So it's powerful. You can also have design patents on user interfaces. So I know we talked about software as a medical device. That's one approach to protect some of the software is filing a design patent on the user interface, which is the look and feel.
So good.
I want to add one point to make sure that we don't forget to make this. It's a really important one, and it's a common, I guess maybe it's commonly overlooked by a lot of startups. You got to make sure you file your patent applications before you start making any public disclosures, right?
Yeah.
Or before you offer something for sale. In the United States, you've got what I consider a fairly generous 1-year grace period. If you make a public disclosure, even at a trade show, so you're you're showing a doctor, a prototype that you came up with, and you don't have a non-disclosure agreement, that might be considered a public disclosure. If that were in the United States, that immediately starts a clock ticking. You have 1 year within which to file a patent application in the United States. In Europe and most other countries, you don't have that generous 1-year grace period. You really have to have filed a patent application covering the subject matter that you disclosed before you actually make that disclosure. So even for a design patent, same thing. You got to make sure that you really get your ducks in a row and get those applications filed before you start hitting the pavement with it and showing it off and potentially making those patent barring type events happen. And like even in this case, it's probably not. Social media tends to be an area where we see a lot of inadvertent disclosures from our clients. Some clients in certain areas, medical device, are much more careful, much more sophisticated. But anything like that, I mean, just make sure you got your patent application on file before you make those kind of disclosures.
I don't know if I can do this, but I think I have 3 questions. Number of years when you deal with strategics and for potential acquisition that they like to see that your coverage is through. Did it I mean, of course, they want to see that there's 20 years, but it takes time. You file till you develop, till you raise capital. I mean, is 10 years enough? Is 8 years enough?
That's a really good question. The way I'd say most people try to handle that is, you need some, so, and this is assuming that, like, if you're generating revenue already and it's a short time from the acquisition to scale, then it's a shorter amount of time, right? Because it's all about
Yeah. You need a
paying off
period
the
of
value.
time for revenue.
Right.
It's like, what's the market, and does the strategic feel like they have enough time to not only attack that market, see revenue, but then maybe build on that patent portfolio or build on a Gen 2, Gen 3. So it's somewhat dependent on.
But from a practical perspective, I think it's one of those things that like when I was running my company, it took a long time to get the approvals and those things. And we were really worried that, God, our patents are going to run out at this time. And we had this but like once you get further along and and your product starts to take shape more and you're doing clinical work with it, like these guys are coming up with all sorts of new interesting claims and challenges that
So
you're layering onto that to extend that out.
Right.
That I would say, practically speaking, like, and again, everything's a little different. If you have a truly funded, like, I think of like renal denervation or something like those big broad patents, but usually you're going to be able to put enough other blocking IP and build that in the market where an acquirer is going to feel pretty comfortable that they can block others from doing it.
Any number of patents that makes a strategic comfortable?
that's the quality of the.
Yeah, it's quality of benefit.
So that's my second question, because I met with investors every now and then say, well, someone's going to come challenge us. I'm like, that's ridiculous.
Yeah, so I mean, I look at it.
Hold on, it's not ridiculous.
Well, let me rephrase it. It's any investor can say that, and it's always a possibility. But right now we have had 19 issued patents. This is where we are.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a pretty good moat.
No, it is a good mode. I mean, again, but there's nuance to it. I mean, like one of the trends, and we're going to run out of time to talk about it, but one of the things we are starting to see, which is causing a lot of anxiety with medical device investors, is this thing called the IPR process, where institutional review board, where you can have a company can challenge once your patent's issued. Somebody can just before you even start commercializing, they can try to invalidate your claims. And on one hand, that's a little scary, just that you could have something invalidated, but it also turns out to be pretty darn expensive. To you, the startup a company. We have a company, Terri and I are in. It's public. You can look it up. But Penumbra, has been hitting them in the IPR process, and they've been trying to. We've spent several $1 million over several years defending that. It's and it's like, oh my God, like new fear level unlocked in venture. It's like, okay, now we got to worry about.
Well,
But
that should be the British system, that if they lose, they pay.
But I will say, and I think Terry raised this point before, it's the quality of your patents. I mean, looking at, the diversity of protection, even just with a design patent, that gives you a little different scope of protection that you might, if one patent's invalidated, you still have 3 others that take different bites at the apple. Just make sure it covers your core technology. And sometimes it's a little difficult to predict in the early stage, but the more you can build alternatives and additional detail into your patent application, the easier it is for us to be able to track a commercial product as it meanders and improves over the years, to be able to try to get different levels of protection that are meaningful and really apply to your core technology. And I think that's the best way. I mean, it's not the number, it's the quality of it and the diversity of it, I think, in my opinion, of the patents that cover your core technology that really is going to make it.
And I guess I would say along the way, it's really easy when you first get started in a startup to sit down with your counsel and start your filings. And then your engineers go 3 different directions because 2 things didn't work. The third thing looks promising, right? And you continue to evolve through concepting to design freeze. But you have to stay connected to your patent counsel because your embodiment of the device is changing. And what you originally filed may not be quite where you're at. So
Well,
the other thing,
the other benefit,
really
like in this one situation where we're dealing with this, what our team did is they have an annual meeting with their patent counsel, and so now they know who their competition is, and they see the product this company is building, and they're modifying their claims to make them infringing on what we're doing. So it's like,
Right.
you know, again, that consistent engagement with your counsel is super important to play that game of poker.
Yeah.
And you have to keep continuations pending. So whenever if your counsel tells you, do you want to file a continuation, your answer should almost always be yes.
Last question. You mentioned the freedom to operate, and some VC had asked us about that. And our attorney wrote a freedom to operate.
Wonderful.
Great.
And does the fact that our attorney wrote it make it less useful to them?
Yeah, I mean, so some VCs will require an independent FTO opinion from their counsel that they choose.
Okay.
Some will want to do it, but they will take great comfort in knowing that you've already done it and you haven't.
Already have
And what they may do, like, you know, to save money sometimes is just like, well, look, let's just like have our counsel check
Okay.
to that it was done appropriately.
Right. And generally so let's say if I was representing Dennis or Terry and you had the FTO prepared by your counsel, you don't want to send it over most of the times because it's privileged communication between your attorney and you. So what we get is what are some of the patents that you found or what was the search strings, but not the actual opinion. Because if you send the opinion over, then you're losing privilege. So it's something to think about.
Yeah, just
And your
our-
counsel should.
And your counsel should
and our counsels will inform you of that. That's how it worked. Yeah.
So this is my last bit of advice coming in as a startup CEO and also being on the other side of things is make sure you have good counsel because they can be a really important asset and part of your team when you go through diligence with VC firms and investors, right? So when we get to the point where there's a term sheet and now we want to spend money on counsel, we're bringing good counsel.
Who would you recommend, Terri?
Well, there's these gentlemen right here at Knobbe who are wonderful, but we're bringing good counsel. So you want to have good counsel too. So I always say it's money well spent because then it's these guys talking to your counsel and it's not an engineer trying to describe what's going on. It's the professionals, not the civilians. So that's my advice.
Yeah.
Right. Thank you all for coming. If anybody has any additional questions, we can stick around for a few minutes and happy to discuss it with anybody. But we appreciate you guys coming. I hope it's a fantastic conference for everyone.